You're good. Sorry, virtual people, you're on slide 5 now. But the individual permits are issued for much larger impact projects or when you're impacting a sensitive area. I assume, I mean, 5% maybe of what KYTC does requires an individual permit. That varies year to year. I feel like we're picking it up recently with some larger projects. And there's some new regulations that are pushing us into the individual permit category where we previously wouldn't have been. We'll talk about those. But these nationwide permits are issued, I believe, every 5 years. The Army Corps rewrites them and issues them. And they're essentially saying if you can fit under these descriptions of activity, that you don't have to go through the whole permitting process, you're covered under a nationwide. And several of those apply directly to what we do. I highlighted some of the big ones. Nationwide 3 is for maintenance work. We stretch that the best we can to fit what we need for maintenance of existing activities. Nationwide 14, that's our main one. That's road projects. It's essentially just roads crossing streams with culverts and bridges. Nationwide 27, one that maybe project managers and engineers won't know enough about, but it's definitely something that we use, and it's the stream restoration. When we have to do stream restoration work to get credits. We'll go into more of that process in a minute. Nationwide 41, a little less used, but it does cover us on some drainage and ditch work along existing facilities. So these are the good permits. These are the easier ones to get, easier ones to work under. And if they fit your project, you're probably going to be not upset by permitting schedule, and things can go cleanly as long as you're not over a very specific waterway. Section 401, which we discussed earlier, is run by the Kentucky Division of Water. Its conversion of the Clean Water Act allows the states to have some say in how the federal permit is followed. It certifies that the 404 permit will not violate state water quality standards. Every state's a little different. I think Kentucky probably fits in the category of least regulated as some of our neighbors. That's a good thing for industry as far as building. But we'll go into that a little bit more because things are changing, it seems, and the 401 process and the Division of Water's role in water quality protection is evolving a little bit. There's a checklist of required info that has to be sent to the Division of Water for you to even start your permit process. I'll put those up here now because a lot of them are very general. It seems like stuff you would instantly have as soon as the project becomes available and you know where you're going to be impacting. But there's a couple things that are harder. The linear feet of stream and acres, wetland impacted, and how we're going to be constructing around those streams and wetlands is information that oftentimes is not yet known until we get later into drainage design. The Division of Water can authorize a nationwide permit under a general certification with conditions, or required individual certification. So these are using the same terminology as the Fed, but they're different things. That was the general and the individual permit. These are the general certification and the individual certification. Activities that would require an individual cert are typically larger scale projects, like I mentioned earlier, that don't meet all the conditions or exceed a threshold of a general, or the project is impacting a sensitive or outstanding water. Certain conditions they can put on a general permit are to limit certain construction techniques, how you're going to access the stream, whether or not temporary work crossing is permitted. Seasonal restrictions. There could be restrictions on working in the stream during fish spawning. Those are usually spelled out in plain English right there in the nationwide permit. You have to read through the condition. Division of Water likes to get a little squirrely sometimes and drop some on us that we aren't expecting. Sometimes Dave, Harmon, and I will push back on those and see if there's a reason for it. We've gotten a couple conditions removed on a project-specific basis, but in general, when those conditions are on our permit, we have to follow them. Another version that we've gotten into recently is monitoring reporting on those permits. We'll talk about that a little bit more. It can be an issue if it gets out of hand and you're not monitoring reporting well. That's a connection between the contractor and the district engineers and Division of Water. When will you need an individual certification from the Kentucky Division of Water? There's a few things that will automatically kick you into that category. I mentioned one at the beginning that's a little less so, but it's projects that propose excessive use of certain materials. such as grouted riprap or something where you're going to be using a construction technique that divisional water feels exceeds what a general certification allows. Projects that are proposed to occur within a Kentucky Division of Water designated special use water or reach of a stream don't qualify for general certifications. You're automatically in the individual category. At the beginning of 2022, when the new nationwides were released, the Kentucky Division of Water added new streams into that category of not eligible general certs. I'm not going to go into how they kind of redefine that language. It kind of goes both ways as far as aquatic supporting life of streams. It brings in the 303D impaired list of streams. The best source of this info for if your project is going to be crossing one of those streams is the Water Health Portal Divisional Water created to help permittees figure out whether or not they need an individual cert. Used to be special use water OSRW. Those were mostly known to KYTC folks and DEA. We can name some of those streams. They're protected for endangered species or otherwise. Licking River, Green River, Rockcastle River. These are streams that we're all familiar with, have a special level of protection. And those were the ones that always required individual certs. The Division of Water is now expanding that a little bit to cover streams that have non-supported aquatic life, full support, a little bit of everything. They're dipping the individual cert net in there over and over to try to see how many permits they can move into that category. That just happened this year, so we're still kind of evolving to that. Why that's important is we're going to get into scheduling, and the schedule to get a general cert versus an individual cert are very different. So one of the reasons that I'm even talking about a lot of this stuff today is because there's been so many changes in the last couple of years, specifically to the 401 Clean Water Act. So you get a little bit more of a background here. Let's get my last slide. Let's just jump straight to 2020, where the Trump administration updated the 401 rule with new response times and submittal windows well defined for resource agencies. The purpose of that was to hopefully help industry know how long it really takes to get a permit and to hold those resource agencies to actual response times and windows, 30 days, 60 days. If they don't get back to you, they could be, holding up a permit. So it was establishing these very rigid windows that you had to hit to get your certification. The Biden administration tried to replace that 401 rule by vacating it, but a court upheld the new rule temporarily because the Biden administration didn't go through all the process of actually writing their own version of the 401 rule. They just came in and said, we're going to rescind the 401 rule under Trump. Court said, no, you can't do that yet because you don't have your own rule to back it up. So we went back to the Trump rule temporarily, but only while the Biden administration writes their version. They have released a proposed 401 rule that doesn't differ all that much from what Trump had, the Trump administration, that EPA, but there are a couple small differences we'll get into. That's out now. Public comment ended in August. I imagine if there weren't any major public comments, it'll mostly look like that when it is enacted and released next spring. So we will have a new 401 rule under the Biden administration next spring. I don't expect it to differ all that much from the Trump rule in regards to kind of how KYTC operates. If we were in different industries, maybe this 401 rule change would be drastic, whiplash, and kind of change a lot of things. I'm going to get into why we've kind of found a middle ground where both administrations can pretty much work under the same 401 rule in regards to road construction. There's a couple things that we're hoping for changes. We'll see. So like I said, June 2022, they released it. Likely have a new pool. I put the little pendulum here because that's essentially what happens. Every time a president comes in, since the 70s, they've tried to leave a legacy of defining waters of the U.S., to leave a legacy of streamlining the Clean Water Act. I don't expect that to change. Every president's going to try their chance at it, and we'll all just have to react. Hopefully they just all land on something that benefits us eventually. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about designated use waters in the state, because it is something that changes your type of permit, and it can mean 3 or 4 months means 15 months in order to get your permit when it's the exact level of impact, but the amount of reporting and data collection and to get all of your clearances in order, to go through the public comment period, it just takes longer. An outstanding state resource water, as you all probably heard that term, OSRW, describes water bodies that have unique features that are worthy of legal protection beyond any other normal water in the U.S. Divisional water defines the water body as an OSRW if a group of animals are living in the water body or endangered or threatened, and they're still living in that particular water body. Or it's like a reference reach stream, which means they could have occurred there if they were still in this area. So a stream kind of represents what a natural stream system was before impacts. Any streams that have already been identified with Kentucky Wild Rivers or federal scenic rivers are automatically put in the OSRW. Those are one of the big ones I've already mentioned: Rock Castle, Green, Licking, really scenic streams with high diversity of aquatic organisms. Back to the 401 WQC process a little bit. Here's a side-by-side on what's required for a general cert and an individual cert. I've gone through this a couple times, but essentially a longer review period, and it can get lengthy beyond 180 days if we don't have all the information that we would normally need for a general cert to inform the individual certification. And then also conditions can be more after you get the permit on what the contractor is required to do for certain seasons he can't work. That's when it gets picked into that category. Water quality certifications are the state equivalent of the 404 permit. You can't have one without the other. Here's a figure from the new 401 rules proposed that allows you to kind of see a step process of an individual certification and a general cert. And the general certification is really brief. The pre-file meeting request form, the first initial step, is not always required for general certification if you're operating under a nationwide permit. Whereas for an individual cert, you have to submit a pre-filing meeting request form, which is available on the Division of Water's website. Wait 30 days as required by 40 CFR 121. And then you can submit your certification request form at the same time to Division of Water and the Army Corps that kicks in their process. In that intermediate time period, you've sent everything that you have available on the pre-file meeting request, but there's certain details that are not included yet. And they may not be available to the permittee at the time. Detailed design and drainage specs that allow us to be very accurate on impacts to streams and wetlands and not have vagueness is where this gets really fine-tuned. So it's important to not start the pre-filing meeting request step before you have some level of detailed design, before you have your NEPA clearances. It's only going to stall the process. It seems like I'll go ahead and get it in now, and that way it can just sit. If it takes too long to get the information or get your NEPA clearances, you'll have to start over with a new pre-file meeting request. That's one of the things that was part of the new 401 rule. In theory, it's supposed to push the agency along, right? It's designed to tell the agency, you just got a request to do something. You only have 30 days to respond. But what it ends up being is, once we start that process, we better have all of our clearances provided, because if we don't, this process has to start over. In that 30-day period as well, we're reaching out. Well, we're okay if they don't ever want to, but the Army Corps and Division of Water is reaching us out to a field visit. They have to field verify what we're sending them are our impacts. If it's a small bridge and the impacts are so minimal, and the only reason we're really even applying is because it's like maybe a protected waterway, and the design shows that impacts to the stream are almost discountable, they may forego a field visit. They did that a few times during the Bridge of Kentucky program. That's a decision that we can't really have input on. That's whether or not the Division of Water wants to go out and look at a site. In my experience, they want to go out and look at the site. They feel some responsibility to feel like somebody in their office took a day, went out with the consultant. If we've hired a consultant to do the work, and our permit folks, and usually an environmental coordinator in the district, we get a whole big team that goes out there, walks the streams and wetlands. And it sounds like, well, that's time consuming. that seems like scheduling and rain and other things could really make that a lengthy process. That's true. And sometimes we get really frustrated when we can't get the Army Corps person to meet at the site on the day that we want them to. But it's very important that those site visits occur. I've learned that on those site visits, that's where common sense usually happens. That's where rational thought can kick in. When we're all looking at the same ephemeral stream, and it's not on a data sheet or represented in a table form. If we're all on the ground looking at the landscape, looking at the adjacent landscape and the impacts that are occurring from farming, industry, industrial use, those are all important things that aid how a permit is put together, but they don't always come across in giant PDF attachments or email narratives and explanations. So going out early in the project step with the people that regulate you, walking through to where you're going to be impacting, may feel like an uncomfortable situation, but it usually makes these permits go faster. And it allows you as a consultant, somebody who's maybe made a call on a wetland being jurisdictional, or you've made a call on a stream being intermittent or ephemeral. This is your chance to defend that call and kind of show the Army Corps exactly why you made that call. It's okay if you were wrong and you can kind of be backed off, but you'll understand that each reviewer sees it differently. And you can almost kind of fit what that reviewer wants to hear and see as you show them the streams and wetlands. We're not doing anything shady or pulling anything over people's eyes. It's literally working relationships. It's knowing how they want information fed to them and how they want to see it. Where you stop the car and walk down the road right away to look at the stream can be important and help you get permits faster if we're kind of very organized in how we do that field visit. That has to occur in that 30-day period. I mean, if you don't get it in the 30-day period, you're just going to be waiting a little longer, but we want it in 30 days or less. Next will be the certification request form. At this point, everybody's been out in the field together. If there was any disputes over stream classifications or wetlands being jurisdictional, that's all been flushed out. Now it's about getting the correct impact tables, a jurisdictional form if it's needed, alternatives analysis if it's needed for an LOP. There's a lot of information at this stage the Army Corps will just bring up and start asking for. Maybe they want to dig into one of your BA minimization measures or ask about something with cultural and historic. You don't know until you start the review process. If they're really busy and they've got a lot of permits to look at, they may not ask about some of those things and just get you your approval and get you a certification. But if they have time and they're interested in the project, or maybe it's in a sensitive area, don't be surprised if you're going to start getting asked questions about deconstruction of the bridge. Where's the waste going? How are we going to be accessing the stream during this time of year? Questions that maybe we don't have readily available in the permit, but you come back to KYTC project team. I'll reach out to engineers like John Michael and others and say, I need a little more information here to get this permit. They're asking how we're going to access this temporary staging area. Things of that nature. That's where that gets flushed out. That can take months if we don't have all the information up front, and it's kind of a sensitive project where they're asking more questions. I wish that was more standardized, but it's not. Here's another figure that also comes from the same information they put out. This one's a little better because it's more, I think, fits what Kentucky does. The last one, I don't know, it's more of the national system, but here is our process as it is. And with those time periods, you can see that we really can't get a permit shorter than 60 days. There's really hardly any way around that. In order to get that certifying authority and federal agency to issue, your minimum of 60 days, reasonable period of time is set at a year, but I can tell you for certain that some of these are taking a little longer when you add together the 401 and 404 process. So the 401 may only take 3 or 4 months, goes on public notice. Now it's time for the Army Corps to do their work, and you're still waiting for another 6 months. So for an engineer, for an environmental coordinator, anyone that's tasked with kind of getting these projects started and starting the permit process so you're not behind the 8 ball. Some advice I have is provide early design to your environmental coordinators, even if it's not final yet. Permit coordinators can then have some input there and let you know what type of permit you would be looking at. So yeah, you may not know all of your dimensions on how you're going to cross that stream, but just let us know the name of the stream. We can maybe tell you if it's impaired or if it's on a OSRW list. So early design that gives us an idea of where we're going to be impacting or informs the process before we get to the point where we have the design needed. Can't start that pre-file process, like I mentioned, until we have our necessary clearances from resource agencies. That really puts the pressure on section 106 and section 7 folks to get their clearances as quickly as they can. It used to be, I feel like, we used to just ask for permits, put in for them, and they sometimes would just sit for months while we got all of our clearances. And it made sense to do it that way. You were kind of doing like a placeholder. Like, I'm going to put this permit in review process. We'll have BA and we'll have ultra historic done at some point. Now it feels like we have to wait for those clearances to be in our hand or almost in our hand before you even start the 401, 404 process. No more waiting. No modifications right now can occur to any permit that has a 401 associated with it. That is really restricting for contractors. Once we get a permit, and in theory, we'd love for it to match exactly how we got it permitted, and that's the way it's going to be constructed, and we move on to our next one. But once they get out the door, especially with design build, where the whole idea is that it's going to change, but even with normal projects, changes in construction can occur. Sometimes they're so minor that it barely changes your impact table. You might be affecting just a sliver of property that has a wetland or some other resource nearby. So those small tweaks and changes now currently could mean you have to get a whole new permit. You don't even get to come back in to your existing permit and modify it. You start the pre-file process over and you define just that new impact as its own project. Not efficient, takes away a lot of flexibility for contractors to go into an existing permit, modify it, send it to the Army Corps and Division of Water and get an updated permit back. It seems like one of the things that's going to be in the new 401 rule is modification in some form will come back. I think the Trump EPA rule removed them without really knowing how that was going to affect industry. And there's been a pretty big push now to get modifications in some form back as a possibility. But as of right now, today, if your project needs a modification, you're starting with a new permit. We've been trying to tell project managers that for a year or two, but it all may change next year. Hopefully it does. All right. So one thing that's on everyone's mind if you're trying to build a project is mitigation costs. I mentioned it earlier, but as part of those 404 permits, if you can't avoid impact, you may have to be stuck in a situation where you're mitigating for stream loss and wetland loss. There's three methods of providing mitigation for a project. There are mitigation banks, which are limited. There are in lieu fees mitigation, which is costly. And there's permittee responsible mitigation, which can be both. So I wanted to at least give everybody a little bit of a rundown of how these each work, so I can explain kind of why we're in a tight spot. Mitigation banks. This is where a private entity, organization, or us, the cabinet, can restore, preserve, or enhance an aquatic resource, creating a bank. The permittee can then purchase credits from that bank to offset the impact accrued as a result of your project. These banks are spread out over the state in service areas, and they're available for all industries to use, not just KYTC. We have some banks that we specifically build for our use, but we're also using banks that were built by other private entities, but so is everyone else. Developers, coal, solar, wind, pipeline construction, anyone that's going to be needing an Army Corps permit that requires mitigation is looking for bank opportunities. So what we're left with is a bank depletion. We've pretty much run down a lot of the credits in certain service areas and have left us in a tight spot on constructing roads and using the mitigation bank. The other option is in lieu fee mitigation. This program generally is administered by a government agency or nonprofit organization that conducts preservation and restoration activities. You give them money, they go build nice streams, and then you get to go build your project. In lieu fee mitigation has gone up as the most cost of things, so it's always an option for us to look at other ways we could do it cheaper. Permittee responsible mitigation, PRM for short, it provides mitigation by restoring and preserving an aquatic resource. It can be done near or adjacent to the project site. So this is on-site mitigation, or within the same watershed but on a different location, and that's off-site. We don't do this very often, but occasionally it does help the project. And I believe we had a couple recently where it's been really beneficial to have an opportunity to do PRM mitigation, because otherwise it would have been astronomical to pay the in-lieu fees. So here's the service areas laid over the district maps to give you a little reference of where they are across the state. There is varying availability within these service areas. I will point out right away, as most people know, service area 10 in the far eastern part of the state that encompasses District 10 and 11 is completely depleted of credits. The Big Sandy has no credits available. Been that way for a while. New in lieu fee costs just dropped last month. So here are the service areas listed, and you can see it varies in cost. There's the old price category and then the new price. So they are all increasing anywhere from 7% to 43%, depending upon your service area. They're as small as $395 in the lower Kentucky, and as expensive as over $1,000 of credit in the upper Licking and everywhere in between. So this is your in lieu fee cost after you've calculated your impacts and you have a mitigation number that you know you need to mitigate for. Army Corps calculates that for you once you've reported your impacts. So I asked Randy Payne, who works in DEA and is our mitigation coordinator. He took on that role a few years ago when we saw the need for someone to be solely focused on mitigation options. Randy is at any point all around the state looking for properties, looking for opportunities for us to partner and build new restoration sites that we can then bank off of. KYTC has 6 mitigation banks with available stream credit today. Oh, this is as of August 1st. You have to make sure I told you all that this is a dynamic number that changes. And just because he gave me an update on August 1st doesn't mean that's the same numbers today. But we do have banks with available mitigation credit in the Jackson Purchase, the Rough and Upper Nolan Rivers and adjacent Ohio River area, that's service area 5, and service area 6 up near the Licking and Salt Rivers, and service area 7 in the lower Kentucky. These banks have stream credit balances ranging anywhere from 600 to 4,500. KYTC has 7 banks with available wetland credits. These banks serve the following mitigation areas. You have the lower Cumberland, which is that western Kentucky portion of the Cumberland River. Service area 5, so that's that Rough River, Upper Nolan, and the Ohio River tributaries. Service area 6, on the District 6 area, I think of Licking River. Service area 7, lower Kentucky, and 2 and 8, the Upper Cumberland, which is the eastern portion of the Cumberland River, in Districts 8. And service area 10, which is the Big Little Sandy Rivers. We have some wetland credits. Wetland mitigation banks have credits ranging from 8 to 33 AMUs, and mitigation bank properties that we're currently in the process of reviewing and adding to our mitigation, our banking is service area 6, service area 5, and service area 1 have projects that are either in construction or are moving that way, somewhere in the restoration process. I've got 5 minutes for you to fill, so I'm going to run through some quick concepts that I ran over that I feel like important to those that are dealing with 401, 404. Stream types. I'll bring this up because streams are mitigated for at different costs, and quality and classification of stream and how they come up with that cost. So your perennial streams are the Ohio River, things that have constant flow year round and in a normal year. Intermittent streams are streams that have flows during wet times of the year. So it's also going to be dry during certain times. Try to find some pictures. And then the ephemeral is just something that flows during or right after a precipitation event, and then it's gone. Hard to find that defined bank and channel, but you can see that it's a stream right after it's rained. These are all protected waterways under the Clean Water Act, but they have different values associated with them depending upon how much linear feet you're impacting. Here's just a good figure that kind of shows you that they're not isolated features. Water is all connected. Seems very cliche to say, but it's very obvious. Your groundwater, your intermittent streams and ephemeral streams in the upland high areas flowing into your lower lying areas with your perennial streams. Wetlands adjacent to those, right along the riverine system, feeding groundwater, exchanging nutrients. Isolated wetlands and ponds that during overflow periods of precipitation, they raise their banks and connect over to ephemeral streams. It's all connected, and that's why it's all protected. High water mark is an important term to know because it's kind of where your permitting starts. Impacts of dredge and fill below high water mark is what starts the 404 process. I hear some of these terms used, and I felt like for a while, maybe I even thought a couple of them were interchangeable. But that low flow channel is just what's wet typically during the year. That's that you're looking at a stream, that's the channel. The next clues you're looking for at OH for the high water mark is where did water flow through here during an ordinary high water event. You can see usually where the vegetation stops and the bank begins to look wet, or there's evidence of flooding drip line. That's where your high water mark begins. The bank full width is a little bit of a different definition. That's where the bank of the stage of the flooding, where the stream is completely full, is at its verge of spilling over into the floodplain. So there's 3 different levels of flow there that can all describe the same stream. And it's important because where you are where you're impacting can dictate how much permitting you have to do. The point where precipitation has filled the stream fully, yeah, I already said that. Here is a good diagram that shows you kind of where section 10 and section 4 kick in. So you have your ordinary stream. The high water mark is right there where the vegetation stops, the water begins. If you're operating in there, that's a section 10 navigable waterway. You have to get that style of permit. The section 404 can be filled to that below the high water mark, but also the adjacent areas that are wetlands, ephemeral and intermittent streams flowing into that perennial. That's that 404 regulated area. And then the upland is non-regulated. That's out of your stream, out of your floodplain. The streams aren't being impacted there. That's normally where you're working. And then you get down into the permitted area. Wetlands, I'm not going to have as much time to go into depth on some of these wetland classifications, but I just wanted to show you all the diversity of what a wetland can be. This is the aerial photography of like a huge forested wetland. It's clear that it's connected to some type of large waterway, river, and this stays wet and has a wetland characteristic likely year round. Even during a drought, the soils are still going to be really mucky and hydrated. Typical, you can see that, you know you're looking at a wetland. This looks like maybe like an ag field and a rain just occurred. So you have that hydrology, you've got standing water. It's obvious that water doesn't drain and seep here very well. The vegetation doesn't look very hydrophytic to me, which means like only grows in wet areas. So the vegetation may not be there, but a combination of standing water after a rain event and then some hydric soils can still establish a wetland. So think about the difference between those two. And then this third photo of like a pristine, very good quality forested wetland. This is Western Kentucky, down in the slows, bald cypress, water tupelo trees, muck up to your knees. That's the highest quality wetland there is. It's providing an immense amount of habitat resources to wildlife, aquatic organisms, and flood protection. There's a lot of reasons why these wetlands are very important to the system. And my last slide, I think I'm going to make it right under time, is aquatic organism passage. It's just a term I wanted to bring up today because it's something that the EPA is starting to dig in a little bit more on and ask us more about in regards to our permits. Right when they get to the final stage too, we'll have a 404 LOP or something that's like almost done. The EPA has their comment period and they throw some questions on us. They haven't in the past. And one of them I wanted to at least bring to the attention of some engineers is aquatic organism passage, which is how a road and stream crossing acts like a natural stream without fragmenting that upstream from downstream. Aquatic organisms are species that use at least part of their life on rivers. So that's your classic fish, turtles, but also other things that use the stream temporarily, maybe a salamander, a frog, or other mammals that end up using the stream throughout their life. But essentially, a crossing that provides aquatic organism movement will usually be sized for passage of erosive flows for large storms. It'll increase stability of the road and safety of the public. We have started to get asked a little bit by the EPA how we're addressing aquatic organism passage. We don't have a standard AOP protocol for design engineers when they're doing design of structures and culverts, but we've been able to dig back into some of the drainage specs that we do have and kind of hold off the EPA for now, just by providing some canned language that obviously the culverts we're designing are designing for to fill the whole stream. Why would you under design something? You're only going to set yourself up for scour. Right now, that seems to be okay. But I think there's a little bit of opportunity that we're going to have to get better at describing aquatic organism passage in our large permits so that the EPA will get off our backs. But that's all the time I have today. Thanks, Bill, for keeping me on task. And luckily, that's my last slide. So if anybody has any questions about all that stuff I covered, go ahead.
I've got a project where we're thinking about only building part of it. And we already have our permit, and you said you can't make any changes. And this one does require mitigation. Would we have to mitigate for the whole thing?
Yeah, so we have had to do that in the past. Come to me and talk about if there's a way we could segment that project, but essentially we've had to do that in the past where we've let one section, but we went ahead and paid mitigation for all of it, which is not ideal because I know that the forecast for when those next sections will even be lit sometimes or let is impossible to know. If it was in one permit together and that permit outlined one amount of mitigation, generally the Army Corps wants to see that mitigation paid up front, even when you're only like a section.
I've already told the project manager that's probably what's gonna happen.
You told them correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question, though. We get that occasionally. We're dealing with updating a permit now for 127, massive project down around the lake. And we've already paid mitigation for the northern and southern sections. Southern section is not even constructed yet. So we did have to pay millions of dollars years ago for a section that's not quite, that wasn't ready then, but now we're ready to send it out. So we don't have that mitigation cost. It's already been paid.
Well, that's what I asked you. Do they update it when you do finally get to construction and you have to pay higher costs?
We fight back and say no.
Okay.
Good question. They would have a justification to say, well, rates are higher now.
Yeah.
Or back then, this class, like there's a way they could dig back into that, but I feel like Danny and Dave have put their foot down before and been like, we paid mitigation in full, we're moving forward.
Yeah, you are getting interest on it.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments or suggestions?
I just like to say something. Number one, Andrew is problem solving, not a problem creator. He's always helping me on all my stuff. Any project manager, you get a new project, get your construction guys out. You know, you try to think like a contractor, see how they want to build this thing, anticipate things. And, you know, when we worked on the Russell Fork bridges, we had the crawdaddy to deal with.
Mhm.
And we were the first on that one, but we didn't know if they would use a low water cross. We had a permit.
Yeah.
And that way it was available if the contractor needed. So get your construction guys involved and, you know, they bring some insight to it on how you're going to build it. You know, you might need this extra stream crossing or an extra little bit of impact. That way you can try to negate some of those potential changes you may have down the line.
That's great advice. John's right. I feel like I've had those type of meetings with John and his group more. I don't know if that's District 12's availability and being upfront, or you all have more challenges because of topography and sensitive streams, but there's absolutely projects where asking more questions up front, digging into the construction flows, because John and I don't know exactly how a contractor would choose to do this. Pull 3 contractors in a room, they might get 3 different answers. We have to only permit it one way. And permitting it the wrong way could drive up bid costs. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be involved, and having early involvement with your project managers, going and knocking on the door of the construction guys and bringing them in during the design and permitting phase sometimes really helps. So thanks for bringing that up. All right. Anybody else have any more questions? Just grab me in the hallway. I'll be around all day doing this again later. Thanks.